Hi, so welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here today talking with Jonathan Jensen from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who's written a really exciting paper that recently came out in JAR titled Searching for the Holy Grail of Sponsorship-Linked Marketing, a comprehensive generalizable sponsorship retention model. So I'm super excited to learn more about his paper and have him share some more insights around that and background around the circumstances that led to the paper as well too. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for being on the podcast with us.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate you for putting this on.
Awesome. So to start us off, for people who may not have read your paper yet, could you give us a quick overview of what it is you looked at and what some of your findings are in the article?
Yeah, sure. Well, this paper has basically been like a decade-long labor of love that I've been working on for a long time, mainly because of the size of the data set. We can talk about that, but it was really kind of born out of really continued frustration of the issue of generalizability. I'm sure this is a common issue in
For
just
sure.
general marketing papers and advertising, but there's been a lot of really good papers published in real journals that might start out with a large data set. Let's say you can think of one that started out with a data set of like 1,200 observations, but then by the time you can't find data, or maybe it was restricted to only publicly traded firms or what have you, you end up only with about 300 observations. And there's also in our field in sport marketing, there's also a lot of papers that end up having like very specific results, like for say global Olympic sponsorship. Well, there's only like 15 global Olympic sponsors, and very few firms can inform that that level of investment. It's kind of like a Super Bowl commercial. Well, who has $7 million to do a commercial firm? All but a very small
Definitely.
subset, of advertisers. So that was kind of part of what I was seeing a lot in our particular area in sport marketing sponsorship. So really, the goal was to try to develop something that could be applied to any sponsorship anywhere in the world.
That's very cool. Yeah. And so can you tell us a bit more about sort of like what your model finds?
Yeah, absolutely. So we ended up doing, because of that kind of overarching motivation of, hey, what's a proxy for kind of sponsorship returns or return on investment, or just a positive outcome in sponsorship that essentially can be applied to any sponsorship, and again, anywhere in the
Hmm.
world. You also see a lot of studies. I mean, you see very good studies that are just looking at, well, 30 firms in Turkey or South Africa.
Right.
Sport and sponsorship is global. I mean, obviously North America is huge, but Asia and Europe are massive as well. So that's kind of where we started out in terms of the perspective. So over a long period of time, with a lot of help from my students in my lab, we basically constructed a historical data set, with a wide variety, a very heterogeneous kind of sample of all different types of sponsorships around the world, and we ended up with a data set that has more than 5,800 sponsorships across
Very impressive.
2,300 or 23,000 observations. And for students out there, I basically say, well, you think 23,000 observation means that if it was an Excel spreadsheet, it would have 23,000 rows. So for those who aren't experienced in big data, so you ended up with a very, very large data set, but more important is the heterogeneity. Lots of different types of sponsorships, lots of
Mm.
different types of firms, thousands of firms from around the globe, again, principally in Asia, Europe, and North America. And the solution that we ended up applying was essentially the probability of the sponsor either returning or exiting in each and every year into the
Hmm.
sponsorship. And there are some limitations we can talk about with that, but essentially that is something that can be applied to any sponsorship, because we generally know when it starts and when it ends.
Mm.
And through a lot of research, we can basically pinpoint that on on an annual basis. So that's where we started, and that's essentially the dependent variable in the model, is the hazard or probability of the sponsor exiting in each and every year. So that's really kind of the solution that we came up with for this paper, to kind of get around this kind of continued issue of generalizability that we're finding in our field of sport marketing.
Yeah, that's awesome though. The data set's huge and that's very impressive. It must have taken a lot of time to put together. And it's like you said, it's very impressive that you have a wide variety of different types of firms as well too, really to kind of, be able to capture those differences.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really the goal, is is if you're an Asian-based firm, a European-based firm, a North American-based firm, you know, is this model relevant to you? Can you use it actually? And that was really kind of our underlying motivation, because there's just so many papers that are just really focused in North America, or even just the US, or just Europe, or just Asia. So we really felt like we finally kind of, at least with this approach, conquered the kind of the idea of generalizability. And so that's really what's exciting about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you know, turning then to think about it from the perspective of an advertiser, right? What are some of the key takeaways that your analysis finds that would be relevant to an advertiser?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a huge part of it as well. I worked in the industry with agencies in the two of the four largest advertising networks, Omnicom and Publicis. So kind of have a understanding what some of the issues are for those advertisers that either have an investment in sponsorship, or are looking to invest in sponsorship, which you know, most large scale advertisers and conglomerates do, you know, have some investment in sponsorship. But that was
Mm,
also a big part of it, that while we're able to explicate in this model a wide variety of different covariates, you know, across you know, a bunch of different things like brand related factors, location, or geographic different factors, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So we're able to, I think, have a lot of findings in terms of what covariates are predictive of success in sponsorship. Really, the kind of the magic, and what, you know, I'm most excited about, is the fact that now that we've built this model that again is generalizable to, you know, really any firm that invests in sponsorship, we can then use it as a predictive model, essentially, you know, apply predictive analytics in that we now know, based on all these factors, eventually how long a sponsor is going to end up staying in a sponsorship. Again, so this is not really the longevity of the sponsorship; it's the probability of them exiting. But through some code in Stata, which is what I use, we can actually then make a prediction into the future and say, well, this type of sponsor located in this area that has these specific factors, and given, you know, maybe what's going on in the economy in that country in terms of inflation and economic growth, then we can predict that this sponsor is going to end up staying in this sponsorship for, say, 8.75 years. And the reason why that's important is typically a sponsor's only you know, making an initial commitment for, say, 1 to 3 years. And now we're able to go well past that and then make a prediction into the future. What that does essentially is it allows the organizations that benefit from sponsorship. We're talking about any organization, not just a sport organization, but nonprofits, the arts, events, et cetera. They can then you know, make a really reliable prediction in terms of the revenue that they're going to get out of that sponsor, and essentially use it as a financial forecasting tool into the future. One of the more exciting things that is happening in the sport industry is VC involvement. So venture capitalists are now investing in sport teams. It's already happening in the NBA. I think it's going to happen in the NFL. So think of it this way: if you're able to use this model as a financial forecasting tool, then you're able to actually better value the assets that you have. And the
mm,
VC that are looking to invest in your organization, it actually provides a much larger and more accurate value, because prior to the development of this model, people were only able to basically value the contracts that they have, or
right.
either in year two of a 3-year deal. This takes it a step further and say, well, actually, you know, this
Like
specific
extended.
sponsor, the model is going to predict that they're going to stay for 9 years with you. I think it also can help from a new business standpoint, in terms of targeting specific types of brands, you know, location, brand related factors. And you're able to actually target brands that are going to eventually end up staying with you longer and end up providing more revenue as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I like that idea of going out and be able to, you know, pinpoint the firms that will get the most benefit from the relationship as well, too, right? That's always important too. No, it's very
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I think, you know, limitations. Some people might say, you know, the a sponsor, you know, staying year after year or having a lower probability of exiting is, you know, really just a proxy for like positive returns and return on investment. We talk
Mhm.
about that in the paper. I acknowledge that it, you know, we're really trying to come at it from a different perspective, and there's a lot of reasons why firms exit or stay in, all sorts of kind of B2B relationships.
Mm,
But really it's the best solution that I've seen, to be able to, kind of proxy these positive returns. And the underlying assumption is, most of these firms are, for example, a paper that we published in JR a couple of years ago on Formula One said, on average, they're spending $5 million on each of these sponsorships. So
yeah,
would they continue to spend and allocate all these resources, to say nothing of the agencies that have to be on board to leverage these sponsorships, as well as, all of the capital within the firm, people and all of that in order to marshal success around it? Would they continue to stay year after year if it really wasn't working for them? So that's kind of a limitation, but also, a way acknowledgement that it's not a perfect, proxy for a positive return
right.
on investment.
Yeah.
But that, again, that was kind of one of the underlying motivations, is how can we get at this and apply it in a really generalized way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you find any factors that were, associated with longer retention?
Yeah, that was kind of one of the exciting things. You just never know when you run the data, what's going to be significant, what's not. But really identified a set of like 5 to 7 really strong, brand related factors that have a historical, really firm foundation in the literature that turned out to be, highly significant. I'll just give you a couple examples. Like brand equity, obviously, is one of the most,
Mhm.
research factors or covariates in marketing and advertising research. And turns out that firms with a higher level of brand equity end up staying in sponsorships longer. And I think the idea or our theory is that if you're a high brand equity firm, you're just, used to longer term relationships, because you understand that you can't just jump
Mm,
in, jump out. You need to, brand equity takes time, obviously. And they understand that they're just more patient in kind of B2B relationships. Hey, we need to stay in this, we need to nurture relationship. We need to understand that building brand equity is a multi-step process. So that was one. Congruence is probably the most, highly studied context in our work in sponsorship. So when there's a better fit, then you end up staying in the sponsorship longer. So that's kind of a proxy for like positive consumer outcomes. And there's been research, in our field that basically says when a consumer sees a better fitting sponsorship with an
right.
organization, they're going to, basically determine that the motivations of the sponsor are going to be more like, effective rather than calculative. So it makes sense that, congruent sponsorships, when you have a good fit, they're going to end up lasting longer. B2B is another interesting one. If you're a B2B firm, then you end up taking a longer term approach and being less likely to
Mm,
exit. And that's a huge thing in our field, looking at kind of while you're using the relationship to leverage kind of other sponsors and from a B2B standpoint, or are you looking at it more purely a consumer play? We actually find that if you're more in it as a long-term kind of B2B relationship where you have to develop, your relationships with other firms, essentially, like you want to sell to other firms rather than the directly to consumer, then you end up being significantly less likely to exit. Again, I think you would just realize, hey, it takes time to do these things. Um, so that's just a really quick kind of sampling of some of the factors, the brand related factors specifically, that ended up popping out. And again, these are just theories, in terms of the why, and we talk about it in the paper. But
mm.
I think they all ties into kind of prior literature and everything.
Yeah, and you've got a great, sample size, at the very least you're seeing that there's an effect, whether or not what might be causing it may still be uncertain, but there's strong literature for it, and you do see that effect happening in any case, right? Which is quite neat.
Right. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
think it's the case that, hey, we don't have enough power, you don't have a
Mm,
large enough sample, or again, you don't have the generalizability that you found an effect that, it might work for this type of sponsor, but there's really a boundary condition and it won't work for others. Yeah. The heterogeneity, that is in this data set, and I've got a table in there that kind of walks through all the different types of sponsorships, and there's thousands and thousands of different firms around the globe in this data set. I think that at least, guarantees us that we don't feel like, hey, you really didn't build a large or heterogeneous enough sample. We feel good about it
yeah.
from that perspective.
No, very, very robust data set. Which is actually nice leading to my next question of like, it sounds like this was a lot of work to get set up. So what prompted you to go through and want to do this, or what gave you this idea?
It started with my dissertation research, actually.
Yeah.
The idea was I'd taken a longitudinal data analysis class where I started to work with big data and started to learn a variety of different methodologies in which to analyze it. And one of them was the modeling that we use in this paper, survival analysis, which is not used that often in marketing, but it's basically a dual nature dependent variable, which did an event occur, and then how much time elapsed before that event occurred. So it's really robust, and
Hmm.
I just looked at it, and I learned it from a demographer that ran a population
Oh,
center at a
cool.
large
Yeah.
public university where they were applying it to look at a variety of different things, that might impact how long a person stays in a market, or how long their marriage lasts, or how long their life lasts. And I just said, this is a methodology that I can apply to what I'm interested in, sponsorship. So I'd done a GIS and quantitative research methods that kind of forced me to take different classes across different colleges. And so once I got exposed to the method, I said, this is something I could do. I just need to, build up enough data to be able to run it the way I wanted. We started with the Olympics and World Cup, which obviously are global context, and large scale sponsorships. And then we just kind of built up the data set on our own. There are ways in which you can buy data like this, but then there's data quality issues, and you just never
Hmm.
know whether it's accurate or not. So rather than taking that approach, we just kind of built the historical data set over time ourselves, and we felt good about the validity of it, in terms of being accurate.
Awesome. Yeah. Speaking of as well, too, aside from I know that like that kind of modeling is very complicated. I know building the data set probably took I'm sure took a lot of time as well too, and effort to go through and do. Were there any other challenges that you encountered when going through and doing this article?
Really, it was just the time factor. It essentially took 10 years to gather this data,
Wow.
to get it to a
Yeah.
point that we felt really good about it. I started in 2014. So it just took time. The good news is along the way, we were able to publish a wide variety of different papers across different contexts, essentially.
Hmm.
Much smaller data sets dealing with specific contexts, and we're able to actually tease out a lot of effects that were context specific, or had kind of these severe boundary conditions. But finally we got to a point now where we could essentially build up this like pooled sample and then identify what factors we could explicate across all of the sponsors. Again, a lot of the stuff we looked at before was really context specific and could only be applied to specific types of sponsorships, but we finally just built up this pooled sample and identified which factors were something that could be applied across all the sponsors, like I said, brand equity, publicly traded firms, B2B, congruence, et cetera, along with where the sponsor is located and economic conditions, things like that, and the industry that the sponsor is in, things like, is it a tech firm, that sort of thing. And then we're able to find that actually that some of the effects that a lot of folks had found in previous studies, like for example, being a tech firm, obviously it's a unique industry, very dynamic, and there's been a bunch of effects that have found previously. Once we applied that to this massive data set, we actually found that by and large, being a tech firm isn't any different than a variety of different industries. So there were some effects that maybe you'd found with smaller data sets or
Huh.
specific data sets that, well, once you apply it to, again, a large heterogeneous data set, you find actually tech firms aren't all that different from, a lot of other industries.
Huh, that's very interesting. Yeah. Cool. And then to round us out, where do you think people should go next in terms of research, or where might you be going, or where do you think there's still unexplored territory that we need to look at in more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So some of the things we're working on now is, the dynamics between the firms. So again, we're really just looking at this sample as a whole, but firms interact with each other, and in fact, within like a sponsor portfolio, I mentioned kind of firms working together from a B2B standpoint, but as certain types of sponsors in certain industries might exit or join a portfolio of sponsors, we're interested in looking at how that affects the dynamics of the other firms in that kind of portfolio or group. So we're looking at that in the context of Formula One. We're looking at what happens when there's corporate takeovers between firms. So most of these sponsorships are exclusive, meaning Coke and Pepsi can't at any one time
Right.
have a sponsorship. So what happens a lot of times is one firm in that industry will enter, another will exit. How does the market see those things? Do those end up being more successful, less successful? The corporate takeovers is something we're looking at right now. And again, as someone who I do dabble a little bit in consumer behavior, but I'm really interested in kind of B2B decision making, corporate decision making, and kind of how firms as a whole interact with each other. So that's really exciting. And the last thing we're looking at is kind of like switches between firms. So when a firm goes from, say, the McLaren Formula One team and moves over to Ferrari, do they end up gaining kind of expertise by the fact that they've been in this ecosystem, or for example, Formula One? Does that end up being a more successful sponsorship when you switch from one organization to the other, or does it end up being less successful? We don't know. So that's just an example. We're now trying to tease out some of the dynamics of the behavior of the corporate decision makers as well as the firms kind of within this sponsorship ecosystem.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Complex, but really interesting to take a look at. I'd be curious to see, what you find for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for giving us such a detailed look at your paper and also taking a look behind it as well too, and what motivated you to go through and work on this. You can read the article. It's in the June 2024 issue of the Journal of Advertising and Research. So I definitely encourage anyone interested to take a look at it. Really comprehensive and really insightful article. So thank you so much for telling us more about it, Jonathan.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate you doing this. And yeah, if anybody obviously has any questions about the paper or wants to talk further about it, they can send me an email or hit me up on LinkedIn, and we can talk further.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being on. Yeah.